What's up, nerds? It's time to stack those 60s. Welcome to another episode of the Brawl Podcast. I'm your host, my name's Riley Nutt, and I'm joined by my two very good friends and colleagues here. First up, we've got Toffel Toralf Severin.
Hello.
I actually managed to mix up your real name with your nickname.
I was confused, yeah.
Yeah, it was. Oh dear, we're already off to a great start. And also, it's Jamin. I don't have a nickname, Kalf.
Yeah, that's my nickname. I don't have a nickname.
Wait. Isn't he Mr. Competitive Brawler?
Mr. Competitive, Mr. 5-0 the league with various decks.
Yes, that's my name. Mr. 5-0's various leagues with various decks. No, actually, 5-0's the Brawl
Mr. 5-0 is actually a pretty cool nickname.
Mr. 5-0.
Mr.
Hello, my name is O. Mr. 5-0.
Oh. Didn't really come together there.
Yeah, you have to admit it did come together very well.
No, I'm admitting that it didn't come together very well.
No, you have to admit it did come together.
We can circle back to this discussion, I mean, but we do have something to get across this week. We're going to be talking about how to build a mana base in Brawl, because it's something that, I mean, at first blush, when we sort of started talking about this just generally, you kind of contended that it was pretty easy, and I think that might be the case for many players who are used to doing this sort of stuff, but for those who perhaps aren't hugely familiar with the ins and outs of building a mana base, maybe they just sort of copy one off the internet, or maybe they're just play all basics and then they don't have to worry about anything. It's a bit more complicated than people actually may think. So we're going to get across all the things you need to know about building a mana base in Brawl, which is I don't know. There's a lot going on, especially considering just the lack of excellent fixing that we have in standard at the moment. Anyway.
Yes.
We will get across that, but before that, we've all had very, very busy weekends, and it's time for the catch-up. It's time for the catch-up. So, big weekend for all of us. We all went across to Denmark, to Copenhagen for the GP. I was commentating and you two played. I had a pretty good time. It was good to catch up with people, and Jamin and I hung out on the Friday before I did some spell slinging and played in the bounty event, and then Toffel, you had a pretty good time playing in the actual event itself.
Yeah, it came to my attention that some broadcasters of the whole magic system are very rude, very impolite, making lots of jokes about very innocent and just normal players.
I know, it's awful. I mean, I have to work with these people week in and week out. And I'm very tired of it too, just sort of poking fun at people they consider friends on stream and all that sort of stuff. No, highly inappropriate, I would say, Toffel.
Yeah, I mean, I always want to write some stuff on papers and show it to the camera. I don't even know if it's watchable, but I always forget because the games are...
Because the game, you actually got to focus on the game. I was wondering, so for those of you who missed it, Toffel was featured twice during the GP, and I was lucky enough to commentate both of those games, and I absolutely tore him to shreds. It was so much fun. But I was sort of waiting for you to rip a page off your life pad and just start writing rude things to show to the camera, but I guess you were so engrossed in the games in front of you that you didn't get the chance. You did really well, though. I mean, you crushed both games that we saw. Yeah,
well, both games were control matchups, and one of them actually went pretty long, which was a bit more my fault than my opponents, because they were just so fast.
Oh, yeah, it's the Stuart Jackson. They were playing so quickly. It was unbelievable. Playing a hard control deck with 4 divinations, I guess you have to play really fast, huh?
Yeah, and that was I actually reviewed the match, and it was so good to look at the gameplay. But I had a bit more tougher spots, and you have to be fair. When they playing their deck, usually they just say go and then have more time to think while I think. But the amount of speed the counter spells flew and stuff was impressive. It was.
You must be pretty proud of yourself as well, because obviously you got that big write up, a major magic. Content site featured one of your articles this week, so that I don't know how he must be feeling pretty good about that.
Really, is that true? I actually don't know. I thought there would be an exclusive article from this very edgy commentator. I forgot his name. Damn it! It's something.
I would never describe it as edgy.
It's something like a warrior or something. No. The name was something from the medieval, I think. I just can't. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, so I wanted to play Eldritch Reborn for the longest time, and It's such a tough deck to build because it's not easy. Like, you have a lot of restrictions. Eldest Reborn is a very needy card. It's very good when you play it, but it needs some situations, some setup. So I've worked on it, and I would say it wasn't quite tuned. When we came back from the Pro Tour, we just said like, okay, we're a bit jet lagged, we're not putting any effort in it, and then I just wanted to play it for fun, and then it actually performed kind of really nicely. So I've added some tormenting voices, which made the deck very smooth, and they look a bit fringy, but it's exactly what it needs. And then
yeah, and you had a reasonably good. You finished in the money, right?
Yeah, I was top 32, so actually pretty good results.
Yeah, it's not too bad. I mean, what was that, like X3, X4? I mean, you also finished like X3,
yeah,
X4, right?
I did. I finished X and 3. You know? But unfortunately, I didn't finish in the money. I was really unlucky not finishing in the money with X and 3.
So X and 3... Wait, hang on. How does that work? At a GP, you finished X and 3 and didn't cash?
Yeah, see, I think I should write a complaint to Channel Fireball.
That seems very odd.
Yeah, it's super unlucky. Like, going 4 and 3 and then not cashing. I don't know how that works.
Oh, poor old Jamin. Another cruisy Sunday for you, my friend. I mean, I don't know. We had a good time hanging out on the Friday, though. It was great to catch up properly in real life.
What?
It sounds like, yeah, Saturday was garbage, but we always had Friday.
Yeah. He said that. Well, I don't want to bring up all these traumatic memories he has from his terrible performance on Saturday.
Yeah, it was a nice weekend overall. Also, like, our apartment was really, really good.
Yeah, that was good. We had like this huge bottom floor with huge tables and couches, and
a piano.
Yeah, we actually came into the house while Jamin was playing very well, actually.
Oh yeah, he's actually a very good pianist. I had no idea until I actually didn't. I mean, I've known Jamin for years, but until he covered my stupid GP Vegas history draft song, I had no idea he was so good at piano.
Yeah, maybe he can put some intro for a segment we already have an intro for.
I feel like all of our jingles are just perfect. It's nice that you guys had a nice apartment though, because I had the exact opposite. I was staying with Yol last, and we shared a hotel room.
Are you saying that Yol Larson is the reason your apartment was not nice? Because that doesn't sound very nice.
No, not at all. No, well, I mean, no, he did kind of play into the level of disenjoyment I had for the place we were staying, because I booked us a place at this. I booked us a room at this place called Cabin Metro, right? A cabin, and I didn't realize it wasn't going to be like kind of log cabin. It was going to be more like a ship's cabin. It was tiny. This place. It was like this tiny room with 2 twin beds, sort of rammed into it. They were right next to each other, and I mean that's fine. Whatever. It normally doesn't take. But there was no room to put our suitcases. Right. The bathroom was like set into the wall, so it sort of ate a quarter of the room there like that, right? It wasn't too bad. But then Yol is... So there are 2 factions on the coverage team. I can exclusively reveal to you right now, there are 2 factions.
The nice people and you?
There are, and then one of them outnumbers the other enormously. There are the snorers and the non-snorers, right? So when we're organising to, sometimes, we share hotel rooms, sometimes people have to have rooms to themselves because of this, but this has always been the traditional line of how we've divided up accommodation with the coverage team, is the snorers and non-snorers. Me, Raf Levy, Matei, Yol, a few other people as well. We're the non-snorers, so we can only share with each other because you don't have to share a room with Neil Rigby. If you're on the same floor as Neil Rigby, you will hear him snoring. It is horrific, right? So Yol and I, we partner up for this one, but I don't know if you knew this, but he broke his collarbone.
You said like the sleeving thing, right?
Yeah, and he was in a sling all weekend.
Yeah, spell slinging, right? That was it.
Yeah, and that was the thing. And the official story that we're peddling for that is that he was wrestling Martin Muller. I've heard other stories, but we're not going to go into that. Anyway, this meant that he couldn't sleep on his side.
Oh God.
Which meant he had to sleep on his back.
Uh-oh.
Which meant that it was like sleeping next to a running chainsaw for the entire night. So I woke up, and I'm jet lagged from Richmond as it was. So I woke up at 4 a.m. right on the Friday, and I couldn't get back to sleep.
Wow.
Oh.
That's pretty early.
Yeah, so I'm in this tiny cramped room with this small porthole-sized window. I've got Yol bloody snoring and snorting away. But then again, it was double XP weekend on Overwatch, so I had a great time.
Yeah, no, I also, because of the jet lag, I went to bed at, on Thursday, I went to bed at like 1 in the evening, like in the night, which was very good. Like, this was the dream scenario. And then I woke up at 8, it's like, 8, I mean, you can sleep a little more. And then I woke up at 3.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and that was way too far. And then,
Oh no, yeah, it's sort of.
we flew to Copenhagen, and I couldn't sleep until like 5 in the morning.
Oh yeah, right.
That's horrific.
Yeah, and then I had the same experience. Also, Jim was. Do you know those comics where you have like those people say like,
Oh yeah. Yeah, is that how Jamin snores?
Like, he doesn't snore, and it's not that like annoying. It doesn't drill your bone in your brain, but it feels very funny. Like, it's like,
I don't do that. I'm not aware that I do that.
Okay, I will record it and play.
Jeez, I mean, I know people can't help it. Like, I know it's not, people don't go to bed choosing to snore. It's not like I'm going to go to bed and I'm going to do everything I can to prevent everyone else from sleeping restfully. But oh my goodness, I can't handle it. And Yola's now on the warning list for the for the non-snorers faction. I can tell you that much. Anyway, with or without snoring, we all had a pretty good weekend. And well, I guess now it's time for us to get on with the show. So I was looking through the 5.0 lists that got published recently from the Brawl League, and there was, well, actually, no, I was going to say there was one thing I noticed. There were two things I noticed. The one thing is going to form the backbone of this episode, and the other is the fact that an Ariel Knight of Windgrace deck 5.0'd. So stick that in your respective pipes and smoke it, my friends.
Was it your build of like all the knights?
There were several similarities. I would actually say almost half the deck was the same as the one that I was playing. Pardon?
The Manabase?
Look, I don't need to say which specific cards, all right? It had Knight of Grace, it had Knight of Malice, it had History of Benalia, a bunch of other cards as well, Plains, Swamp. So look...
Is this one of those things where, like the Cabal thing, where you actually play vampires?
Yeah, look, no, look, it's just, I mean, it's not Knight Tribal. That deck is still waiting to break out to the to the
It's
forefront.
not ready yet, yeah.
not ready to be unleashed. But it was nonetheless a super sweet deck. I mean, it's black white mid range. It plays very good removal, efficient creatures, and yeah, it's a deck that obviously I'm very very pleased to see. And actually, like, this is not a joke. It's sort of a deck that if I'm looking to play more competitively rather than my silly all-in Tribal Knights deck, I might actually get involved because I love casting and activating Ariel Knight of Windgrace. But when I was looking through these lists, I noticed something quite interesting, and these lists, we'll publish the link to these lists so you can look at them themselves. But there were two lists that funnily enough, were posted right next to each other, right? One was by a person named Chenstein9, which again I'm assuming is not their real name, and the other person whose name is Box, who I guess could be their real name. We'll see. Both of these decks were monocolored. Chenstein playing Lyra Dawnbringer and Box playing Ovia Pashiri Sage Lifecrafter, right? One of them plays 15 basics, and the other plays 21 basics, but they're both playing 23 lands. So one of the lists is playing 8 non-basic, I guess, quote-unquote, utility lands, and the other one is playing 2. Now, what I found really weird about this is that the mono-white deck is playing Benalish Marshal, the triple white card, and is still playing Arch of Orazca, Cradle of the Accursed, Dunes of the Dead, Field of Ruin, and so on. Whereas the other one, which is not even playing Steel Leaf Champion, is just playing 21 Forests, Field of Ruin, and a Hashep Oasis. And I looked at this and I thought, this doesn't make sense. One of these players has to be making a mistake. I mean, neither of them can be 100% correct with the way they've built their deck. And then you think about all of the other choices that are involved with making 2-color mana bases, and then 3-color mana bases, and even maybe 4 or 5-color mana bases if you're playing, Yordar, Archmage Eternal. So I think there are... On the surface, the choices are very easy, right? You search for all the lands that you can put in the deck, you put them in, and then fill out the rest with basics. But obviously, there's a little bit more sort of moving and shaking to be done when constructing a mana base in Brawl.
The first thing we have to ask ourselves when building a Brawl Manabase is what lands can we use? And that's quite obvious since we're basically playing with all of the standard card pool. We'll just use the standard lands, cycling lands, the untapped lands if you control 2 or less other lands, and the check lands like Dragon Skull Summon. The problem is, in standard, you can just build your mana base out of 4 feathered pools, 4 drowned catacombs, and then you're basically set to go. But in Brawl, you can only play one of each of those. So that will make for significantly weaker mana bases than in standard.
I guess the problem here is that, standard mana bases at the moment are not particularly they're not bad. You can get away with 3 colors quite easily. 2 colors is very, very easy indeed. But, even with 3-4 jewels of each color, and this is going into sort of submerged boneyard territory, or when we're you have to play your Forsaken Chapel in your Ariel Knight of Windgrace deck. Already scraping the bottom of this barrel and having to play so many basics means that even a 2-color mana base can be kind of awkward.
Yeah, I even had the problem in standard when playing the Bled Rec deck that I wanted more 2 mana lands that come into play untapped, but there were none. And I couldn't afford to play more tapped lands because I already played the 4 cycling lands, the 3 Memorials, and 1 Cinder Barons, and 1 Evolving Wilds. And this is a lot of lands that come into play tapped.
And now, Toffel just said he had problems in standard with a 2-color mana base. Imagine that in Brawl. So when building a 2-color deck, keep in mind that you shouldn't be playing those colors equally. Otherwise, your mana base is probably going to mean trouble for you. Because if you play Goblin Chain Whirler and Benalish Marshal in the same deck, you will cast neither of them on turn 3 ever.
Well, let's talk about this a little bit, because this is the other thing that's worth considering when it comes to Brawl is, the heightened power level of double casting cost cards, for example, Vraska's Contempt or Rekindling Phoenix. These are cards that you should be aware of. They're not going to be consistently cast on turn 4 every single game because your mana is just not as good as it would be otherwise.
You could dedicate your mana base to make your deck cast those cards on turn 4. Either by, playing single color or building your 2-color deck in a way that it's heavy on red, and then you'll always cast Rekindling Phoenix. But you shouldn't expect casting double-colored spells on turn 3 or 4 if your deck is 2-colored and heavy on both colors. That's at that point you're just flipping coins to whether you will be able to cast the spell on the turn you want to.
The good part about it is that you don't have that many 2-colored spells. You're not playing for Vraska's Contempt or Phoenix or Glorybringer or whatever's Gearhogs, because there are not that many options that are good cards that cost double mana cost, which is kind of given from a design standpoint. They're not putting all those 2-colored cards in a set or in the standard environment because they know they're probably a bit more powerful and you want to play them, so they will give you a little easement on the Brawl things because there are a lot of spells that only cost 1 mana anyway.
Is this a little bit different when it comes to gold cards? If we're thinking about a card like, say, Unlicensed Disintegration, which is, it's not double red, it's not double black, is that easier to cast or harder to cast because it's 1 red-black?
Gold cards are much easier to cast because, especially in 3-color decks, the combination of different colors there are more combinations to get red-blue than double red, because all your mountains now pair with islands and with the dual lands, for example. So the multicolor cards tend to be really good. That's why they're multicolored. You have to play 2 colors. They're stronger. There are usually a lot of them. So if you build a Brawl deck, you find yourself playing a lot of multicolored cards. And they're nice if you can fit the mana base to cast them, which is usually not as much as a problem as those double colored. But you still have to make sure that your multicolored cards aren't taking over your mana base. If you play, for example, Contraband Kingpin, which costs blue and black, it's still a challenge to get blue and black on the second turn. Or is your commander even is a 2-mana card.
There's one very popular commander that actually has that exact problem. It's Hapatra. Hapatra is played quite a bit online, and she's the green-black 2/2 that synergizes well with -1/-1 counters. And I've seen the deck struggle to cast her on turn 2 a lot. Like, obviously, if they open on a green-black tapped land, they're quite likely to cast her on turn 2. But I've also seen lots of games where they go like forest, and then they have to pass the turn or play a mana dork first before they can go into casting their commander.
It's not often that we consider 2 color mana bases to be awkward, and you can't take that philosophy from standard. We go, oh yeah, I can just play green white. That's fine. The mana's fine. It's not fine in Brawl. And when you're building a deck, when you're choosing your commander, and which is essentially going to outline what kind of color requirements you have, especially if the commander itself is cheap, as you said, Jamin. This is, considering what your commander needs, considering what the rest of your deck needs, is really important when it comes to actually building the mana base around it.
Also, if your commander dictates you to play cheap cards, like how Patra kinda does, because her ability is very impactful in the early game, but not as impactful in the late game. So you want to give her, you want to have a well streamlined play, maybe turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, and so on, to use her tokens and her counters. You will have to have a difficult mana base for that situation. It's much different than playing Teferi, where you just play a lot of removal spells that cost usually a white and then some counter spells, and you not even that sad if you don't get one of those colors until turn 3 or 4.
And then, as I said before, there's decks like Ovia Pashiri where you need to have an untapped green source on turn number 1, and maybe that's one of the reasons that we saw 21 forests played in the deck to support her, because they just always want that consistency there of being able to cast their cards on time. I think certainly my approach to building a Brawl mana base before having this discussion with you guys, and maybe what other people have done as well, is just jumping on Scryfall, looking at all the potential cards that can be, or potential lands that can be included in a list, in a 2-color list especially, playing 1 copy of all of them and then just filling out the rest with basics. And that is a very easy and very simple way to do it. But you're going to, and look, you'll end up with a functional, or at least semi-functional mana base. But there are more moving parts than this when it comes to actually putting together, the optimal mana base.
Just because you play 1 commander or a certain color combination doesn't mean all your spells and colors are distributed evenly, right? That's what Jamin said before. Just because you play Nicol Bolas, for example, it doesn't mean that you are playing red, blue, and black in the same amount, in the same distribution. You might end up playing a blue-black control deck that only splashes red for even the commander itself, or maybe like a few red spells that are so good you have to include them anyway, like Upbraid, like maybe other removal spells or threats. So right from the gate, when you use your commander, you do have choices how to distribute the cards you're playing. For example, when Jamin played on his stream the Huatli deck, he didn't play a white-green deck. He basically played a mono-white deck, splashing green. And that definitely had a huge impact on the mana base. He didn't go through, it's like, I put all the duels in and then I share evenly. It's much different, because then if you play mono-white splash green, you can also allow yourself to play some utility lands, which you couldn't if you have a normal 2-color deck.
I think it's really important to note here what you're saying there, Toffel, about, a deck like Nicol Bolas compared to something, say, like Admiral Beckett Brass. Both of them are playing Grixis, but the ways that you build the individual decks, the respective decks, may end up with mana bases that look very different. And in 3-color lists, that's unsurprising. But even in a 2-color list, your Shanna Cisse's Legacy list is going to look very different to your Huatli Radiant Champion list when it comes to building the mana base. It's not as if there's just a stock 2-color mana base with X number of dual lands, X number of utility lands, and the rest with basics, that you can just, there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to even 2-color mana, even one-color mana bases.
It all depends on which spells you want to cast on what turn. In Shanna, as you said, you always need Shanna on turn 2, so you probably play fewer 1-colored tap lands, and you always want to open on tap land into untapped land for Shanna. But with Huatli, you can probably go a bit easier on the green part of it. If you're basically playing mono white, you only need green by turn 3, turn 4 maybe. It all depends on which spells are you trying to cast on what turn? And as long as you keep that in mind while building your mana base, you will probably be fine.
The starting process for building mana bases for any Brawl deck is generally going to be pretty similar, regardless of what color combination you're playing, because you're going to look at the dual lands that are applicable for your 2-color or 3-color list, and you're going to play most of them. From there, filling it out with different numbers of utility lands and basics is where it gets kind of complicated. Just a very basic general question that I think is important for people to know the answer to. Is there any reason not to play every single dual land that your color combination wants?
Yes. In the Joda deck I talked about last week, I tried fitting all of them in. There's too many.
Okay. Is there a situation? Is there a reasonable situation that people might actually have to deal with where they're not going to play every single dual land that they can? For example, if you're looking to build a blue-white deck, if you want to build a green-black deck, is there any reason not to play every fast land, check land, cycling land, tap land that you can?
So our relationship now comes down to reasonable answers? I don't.
Wow.
I think in
How
this situation, we could stretch to give a reasonable and useful answer. I know we don't do it very often, but I feel like every now and again it might be helpful.
That sounds so hard. Like
just this
Not
once.
considering every corner case?
yeah, it's like maybe like a theoretical like loophole or something.
Maybe not splitting every single hair. Just one time. One time, guys.
All right, one time.
Well,
I don't think I've ever built a two-color deck in Brawl where I didn't include every tap land available to me.
When you say tap land, you mean dual land, right?
Yes. Yeah, of course. Like every land that produces potentially 2 colors.
So, did you play Crypt of the Eternals in your Scarab God deck? Because that can potentially make those 2 colors.
Great. It's going to be one of those. Well, no, I'm not going to say it's going to be one of those. It's always one of those
Well, I
episodes.
think behind you seeing this is a joke, I think this is actually fairly...
Yes, this is very relevant, as Toffel said, because if someone hears me saying I'll play every fixing land available, I don't mean Crypt of the Eternal. I'll take out Crypt of the Eternal. I'll also take out Cascading Cataracts, and I'll also take out Unknown Shores.
I mean, Cascading Cataracts is a Goblin Chainwaller fixer.
Technically is, if you want to cast your Goblin Chainwaller for 6 mana. So, what those 3 lands have in common is that they require you to pay more mana to play your colored spells, right? Crypt of the Eternals is the one that does it for Grixis, right? You pay 1 mana and you tap the Crypt to generate one of the Grixis colors. Cascading Cataracts requires you to pay 5 mana and tap the Cascading Cataracts to produce 5 mana in any combination of colors. And Unknown Shores is a draft. I don't want to say all-star, because even in draft it sucked.
Wait, it's not an all-star.
It produces any color, right? If you pay the additional tax. And what this does is it forces you to pay more mana for your spells. And it turns out if you shift all of your cards 1 mana upwards, they become quite bad. Like playing Lanoa Elves for 2 mana suddenly is quite mediocre.
Now, what I would do here if I were Jamin or Toffel is then talk about the fact that he's not going to play Unknown Shores, but will play Painted Bluffs because he didn't mention that specifically in his rundown of all the list play. And also, of course, Survivor's Encampment, which does the same thing except you have to tap a creature. But I'm not going to do that. And also, I'd like to bring you back to the point that when I specifically brought up this point, I specifically said dual lands, not garbage, draft chaff, 5-color lands that no one is actually reasonably going to play.
No, but they are kind of dual lands.
They're not dual lands.
Like
They do fix
They're
you.
not. They're not dual lands. A
Yeah,
dual land produces 2 colors of mana.
they produce 2 colors of mana.
They don't produce 2 colors of mana exclusively.
Well, depends. Actually,
They're not a dual land.
Actually, in a commander
not a dual
deck, they
land.
do.
No, in a commander deck they don't because they can.
I've got a question for you, Riley.
Yeah,
I'll name a land and you'll tell me if it's a dual land.
Ooh, interesting. Love it.
fine, go.
Okay. Scalding Tarn?
No.
Temple Garden.
Yes.
Arena.
I don't even know what that card is.
No, Arena. It's a land. It taps for 3 mana.
Yeah.
and it lets two creatures fight.
How is
It doesn't produce mana, but it lets two creatures fight. It's a dual land.
Yeah, well done. Yeah, no, that is a duel. That's a duel with an E land. Yes, you're 100% correct.
I love it.
That's a very good little bit. All right, Toffel, we're going to settle this. We're going to settle this in the only gentlemanly fashion. It's not good. We're going to have a dual land duel here. On Twitter, I will post a poll.
Yes.
And people will get to decide whether lands that produce more than two types of mana are dual lands, or whether they have to produce exactly and only two types of mana.
No, that's not the assessment, because what you are doing is using general conception. But I'm saying that in a Brawl context, those lands are dual lands because they make both manas.
Okay, well, we'll just phrase the question. Is Unknown Shores a dual land in Brawl?
Yeah,
Okay,
I
fine.
would agree to that.
Okay, and I will bet you 5 boosters that we get more no responses than yes responses.
Okay, so the question is, imagine a Scareguard Brawl deck, is Unknown Shores a dual land?
Sure. In a two-color
Shores.
Brawl deck. Unknown Shores, specifically Unknown Shores.
No, because you said shore. It's like Unknown Shores, not Shores.
Unknown Shore.
Well, you actually had known Shores because you
Well,
just...
are you sure?
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure.
I'm reasonably sure. Anyway, enough of this.
Now I want a
enough
land
of this
that's
frippery.
It's called Reasonable Shores.
Yes. Or unreasonable shores, like.
So let's drag this train wreck back onto the tracks here. You said, there's no situation in which you're not going to play every single dual land, every single land that taps for the two colors you're looking for in a two color list. So every cycling land, every fast land, every check land that you can get your hands on, essentially.
Yes, especially evolving ones.
Yeah,
Don't forget that.
That was my question. So yeah, I was asking about Evolving Wilds because it kind of get two colors, but once you decide it only has one, so it's a bit of an awkward choice, which is not technically a dual land, but somehow yet it is.
You will rarely keep a one-lander, right? So you already have the context of your hand in like which spells you want to cast and which lands you already have in hand. So I consider Evolving Wilds a dual land.
Yeah, but what if you have Sweltering Suns and Rascal's Contempt?
Well,
and a Mountain in a Swamp?
You'll hopefully draw another land, and then
what if you don't?
Or you have to gamble, or we won't consider every technicality.
No, it's not technicality. It's actually an interesting question. Like, you will play it.
Well, then you've got to assess what your opponent is doing, or if you're on the play on turn number 1.
The main question is basically you always play Evolving Wilds, and that's what we agree on, right?
Yes.
All right. So what's with Ether Hub? Because that is kind of a duel, but only once.
I'm really unsure.
Shores?
Yes.
Unshores?
I'm really unsure about Ether Hub because in the decks that want to curve out, it's so bad because once you've used it doesn't fix you anymore. So I tend not to play it, but I actually wanted to hear your opinion on that too.
Because from building the standard decks, I know that the black-red decks sometimes play it in Ether Hub. And they're definitely curving out, and they're definitely not using it for the energy purpose at all. I think maybe there's a Harvester in the sideboard or something, but this is maybe a bit different because they're usually mono-red splashing black for a little. So they play a lot of red sources anyway, and the purpose is to make one black once in a while, maybe a third red for the Chain Whirler, but they're not as needed as maybe in a Brawl Manabase. But the question is, do we include Ether Hub?
I'm inclined to say no, but I'm not 100% on that yet.
Have you tried it in your decks?
Yes, and the way it often plays out is I don't draw a white source for my green-white deck, or let's say a green source, and then I have 2 green cards in hand, and I can decide on playing one of them with the hub, and then the other one is still stranded, which, I guess that's technically an upgrade over not being able to play any of the green cards.
Where I like Ether Hub from a thinking mind theoretical point of view is when you can make a color that helps you get colors. For example...
Yeah, I guess if you're splashing green, that's exactly what you mean, right? Like casting Llanowar Elves?
No, if you're not splashing green. If you're playing green, and splashing white, for example, and your green cards include maybe a rampant growth effect or a creature that can make a different color of mana. So you have the ability to splash for white, but also if you draw it, your one-shot green actually gives you another green, and that's good.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
And on the other hand, on decks that this color gives you gives you access to card draw, like for making blue. Like if you can cast divination out of the mana for blue, you're likelier to hit the blue again and then go on from there.
All right. Listeners, you heard it here well,
You heard it here fourth. You've already heard it 3 times, but this 4th time should convince you. Ether Hub, sometimes play it. I think there is a lesson here, or just a very simple rule that we can sort of put here. Play all of the dual lands, and by that again I mean cycling lands, tap lands, fetch fast lands, and check lands. Play those cards in essentially every multicolor deck that you're playing. But then there are other ones that, are going to be more situational. Ether Hub is a sometimes food, not an always food. Evolving Wilds is considered as one of the the dual lands for the purposes of this puzzle here.
And last but not least, Arena is a dual land.
It's the dual land, as we've already definitely already established. From there, however, things get a little trickier because it's fine to say, okay, I'm playing this 2-color list. Well, I can already lock down 4-5 slots of my mana base. I'm playing 3 colors. I can already lock down however many more. That's fine, easy. From there, it becomes a little more tricky because from there, you've got to start figuring out how to fill it out with basics and with utility lands. So what's the process that our listeners should go through if they want to take a 2-color list? They've got their dual lands in there already. What's their next step with building a mana base?
So the first thing they need to do is open their favorite browser, and then they'll go to channelfireball.com, and then they'll go to the Frank Carson article that was written like in 2013, and then they'll find very useful tables there.
Like so what these an ebony table.
Yes, an eating table, a table to prepare food on. Your typical Frank Carson article.
Are very useful.
It's all Frank Carson ever does. No, those tables will outline how many colored sources you need to be able to hit 1 colored mana, 2 colored mana, or 3 colored mana by a given turn. Right? How many sources do you need in your deck to be able to cast those cards on curve? And this article is incredibly helpful.
This is if you haven't seen this article already, there's a link to it in the show notes, obviously. But this will be so helpful in helping you build any mana base that you're trying to build, regardless of the format. But it goes a little bit further than this, Jamin, because what our listeners have to do now is, I guess, start to realize which cards they're wanting to cast on which turn. So if you've got a 3-drop that costs 1 black, for example, or you've got something that has, that's, and you want to cast on turn 3, that's very different to a double cost card that you want to cast on turn 6. And so the mana requirements for each of these should really guide how many basics you're playing of each color.
Definitely. Obviously, the dual lands count for a source towards both colors, right? Because they produce both colors. And then now you have to figure out what your deck wants. We keep coming back to these cards like Benalish Marshal or Goblin Chain Whirler, but that's just because these are like the biggest outliers, right?
They're like the most extreme examples.
Yes. Having triple colored mana cards on turn 3 is like the hardest requirement you can fulfill in Brawl. Because according to that article, you need like 22 sources of a color to be able to cast them on turn 3. Now, these cards are usually also fine plays by turn 4 or turn 5, because pumping up your entire board is a strong move in the late game also, right?
Also, you don't have as many of 3-color cards as in standard. Like, you don't play 4 Chain Whirlers, you only play 1, where it's not as bad if you draw 1, you can play something else. It said that you might draw 2 of them and you want to play them, but in this case, you can also play them turn
Exactly. So you might like loosen these rules just a little bit, especially for the triple colored mana, right? You probably can go a bit easier, but you also like have to accept then that when you draw those cards, you will sometimes not be able to play them by turn 3.
Which is you have to assess if the cards that you're holding are very needed to be played on turn 3. Cards that come in mind are maybe actually it's hard to find one of those cards. Maybe Steel Leaf Champion is very, very good, like because
Steel Leaf Champion's power level actually drops off quite a bit right after turn 3.
Yeah, exactly.
Once you reach turn 4 and you pay triple green, you're like unlikely to cast a second spell in that turn, and at that point you've just played like a 4 mana 5/4, which
it is fine, but not as insane. Like, but usually those cards, they have in mind that you're not guaranteed those mana, and they don't want you to put cards in your deck that reward you for playing only the sources and don't reward you later. Like Benedict Marshall still is a hymn that is later on, like a good effect that you play on turn 6. Tempest Gem definitely, it's a very efficient flyer. Even like Dreadshade feels like it's not that bad to cast it later because it's a huge creature. So you most of the time can be a little flexible, but you shouldn't get to lose. Like it doesn't mean like, oh, you can shave off 3 lands for like Zephyrian Voids or something.
And this is the next thing we're going to come to is yes, these utility lands. So after you have recognized which creatures or which spells, I suppose, you want to cast on which turns, if you're playing this brilliant Ariel Knight of Windgrace deck and you're looking at Gifted Aetherborn, are you casting it on turn 2? Well, probably not a lot of the time if you're also trying to cast things, like a Toolcraft Exemplar, like a Dauntless Bodyguard. There's a lot of tension built in between that one drop, those 1-drops and that 2-drop there. So make a realistic assessment of which cards you want to cast at which point, and then fill out fill out your deck with the basics that you're going to need to do that, depending on color. Let's talk about utility lands, though, because there are quite a few of them in Brawl, quite a few of them in the standard card pool, and these are the ones that are really going to, individualize or shape certain situations in games in certain matchups where, you want something like a Hostile Desert, you want something like a Scavenger Grounds, you want something like an Arch of Erazka. Very high impact, very powerful utility lands, but it's about finding the right space for them. It's about finding room for them and about prioritizing which effect you want the most.
So usually they're not high impact. Generally, they're very low impact because they're lands, but the relative impact of having a basic is very high. I guess that's what you meant, right?
Sure, sorry. Like in contrast to, the difference between the impact of basic planes versus an Arch of Erazka is enormous.
Exactly. That's the thing. Like the land itself is not as valuable because you're tapping 6 mana for drawing a card. But then again, you didn't do anything for it except for playing it as your land that still makes mana. So there are downsides in it doesn't make color, but usually that's about it, and then it just lingers in your game until you might want to use it. So it's from that moment on free if it doesn't cause any problems.
So let's figure out what kind of list we can look at here to not cause problems using this table that Carsten has put in his article here. In a monocolored list, you said we needed, what was it, 22 colored sources to cast something like a Chain Whirler?
Yes, 22 colored sources are needed to cast Chain Whirler on turn 3 reliably. To be fair, this table is for 60 card decks, and we're only playing 59 card decks, but let's not get caught up in like little facts. Let's not split every hair.
1.5%. It's not that irrelevant.
All right. Well,
but
as
also
I
your
already
commander is
said,
a card you want to cast. So
yeah, but you don't draw it. So like some of the math gets screwed up just a tiny bit there. But I already said that you can like skimp on colored sources a bit since you're only casting 1 Chain Whirler in your entire list, right? So you'll be fine if you play like 20 red sources and then fill out the rest of the deck with colorless sources. If you can do so, 22 is like ideal for casting your spells on time. But as Toffel said, these colorless sources have a real upside in the games where it's relevant. Like having an Arch of Araska versus not having one is the difference between drawing 2 cards a turn and drawing 1 card a turn in some games.
Yeah, from the list we have assessed, which we probably put in the show notes, I assume, there are at least 3 lands that I really, really want to play most of the time, if I can. And that's Arc of Araska, the Field of Ruin for my opponent's lands, that, for example, those tapped utility lands that make a colored mana, which are very nicely to destroy, and Scavenger Grounds.
Yeah, those 3 are the ones that probably have the highest impact among all the colorless lands that are available to us in Brawl.
By the way, quick side question. If you're playing a color, do you play, well, besides red, do you play those come into play tapped lands that have the ability?
The Memorials.
Yes, the Memorials.
I like most of them. Like, the blue one is obviously very powerful, especially since blue decks tend to not be too aggressive or, like, too curvy. I dislike the red one because the upside.
Of course, it's bad.
Well, destroying lands could be relevant, right? We're playing Field of Ruin, but your red decks oftentimes want to curve out, so that's why I don't include it there. And then I include the green one in slower green decks, right? In mid-rangey green decks, it's fairly good, but like I didn't include it in the Huatli list, for example, because it was more about curving out. And the white one is actually quite nice there because it gives you like a wider board, but the green one doesn't like impact the board. It only fuels your hand.
But what you're saying there is it's worth at least looking at those cards and seeing if they're a good fit for your list. And
definitely.
It's close to free. I think it reminds me of these other deserts. There are 10 deserts that I will generally, I mean, unless I've got a good reason not to, I'll generally include the Desert of the X. So, for example, Desert of the Mindful, Desert of the True. I'll generally always play the versions of that I can. And then the spell lands, the Ipnu Rivulets and the Hashap Oasis. It again depends what your deck is trying to do, but if you're playing an aggressive red deck, yeah, play Ramiap Rooms for sure.
Oh yes, it's banned in standard for a reason, and like having access to a spell-like effect on a land is just so huge that the life loss you experience out of it probably doesn't matter.
And also, if you play Raminap Ruins, you might be a bit loose on playing another desert like Scavenger Grounds.
Yeah, it has like additional upside then.
Yeah, so you just say like you fill up the slots with the colorless lands and then you're happy with it?
Yes, that's what I usually do. I'll see how many colored sources do I need, and then I'll fill out the rest of my land slots with the utility lands I want. You usually only get that like the freedom of just filling up your mana base with utility lands in one color decks, because as soon as you hit 2 colors, it's usually hard to hit all the requirements for your mana base with the colored sources. So as soon as you hit 2 colors, you actually need a really good reason to play utility lands, in my opinion.
So let's just sort of wrap up that monocolored thing there with a nice, easy to remember sort of rule of thumb. If you're playing a monocolored list in Brawl, make sure you've got at least 20 sources of your chosen color, including things like the deserts that we talked about, the spell lands and the memorials. And then from there, you can fill out the rest of it, whether you're playing 22, 23, 25, 27 lands, you can fill it out with more of the utility-based lands, like Arch of Araska, like Grasping Dunes, what have you. Let's talk about dual. I mean, I would say the majority of Brawl lists are going to be double-colored. And for that reason, I want to talk about the role of utility lands in them because, I mean, you've just painted a pretty pessimistic picture of how many utility lands it's possible to play in a 2-color list.
It all comes back to how bad the fixing in Brawl is, because you can only play one of those fixing lands. And as soon as you like actually build the deck and have it lying out in front of you, you will realize that you don't have a lot of space. Like, you'll often come short on like playing double colored cards in both colors. That's an actual big challenge, playing double colored cards in both colors and still like curving them out reasonably from your mana base, with your mana base. So oftentimes I won't be playing any utility lands in my 2-color decks. Sometimes I will like find a slot to fit them in just because I want the effect. Like Arch of Araska, for example, is a very unique effect in that it draws you cards out of the land. as is Scavenger Grounds, because exiling graveyards is surprisingly relevant against cards like the Scarab God or the Phoenix. There are lots of graveyard interactions in Standard.
Also, on a little side note, you probably will always just generally include Field of Ruin because it also fixes.
Yes, and your opponent probably has an unbasic land lying around.
Like, this doesn't count as your colorless source.
Oh, so Field of Ruin is just basically a snap include in every Brawl deck.
Yeah, pretty much, I would say.
Yeah, it's a bit awkward if you want to, play like 1-drop, 2-drop, because then the fixing is super slow. But the added upside of destroying like a Search for Azcanta is
exactly.
very
I was
high.
going to say, if someone's playing a Search for Azcanta, then you're just going to feel so smart if you can blow up their Sunken Ruin with the Field of Ruin.
Also, every Fatal Push deck will definitely play Field of Ruin.
Oh yeah, just like Evolving Wilds in order to enable Revolt. I mean, even there's other cards like Renegade Rallier and stuff that it can be very useful with.
Yeah, exactly. Very good.
So you're going to have to be very mindful of which utility lands you include in 2-color lists. And again, we've prioritized a certain 3, Arch of Erazka, Scavenger Grounds, and Field of Ruin as the ones that you should really look to include before you start looking at any others. But still be very mindful of your deck's mana requirements, and don't be too hasty to throw too many sweet utility lands in there. There's one final thing we have to discuss here, and I feel like it's going to be a very short discussion. What about the role of utility or colorless lands in a 3-color list?
Yeah, please don't. It will not work out well. Like, unless your deck is like monocolored with like light splashes and both of the other colors, I don't see how you can make space for like utility lands, or you end up like playing 30 lands or something.
Toffel, before you were saying, you can imagine a list like a Nicol Bolas list that there's just a blue-black control deck that splashes red. In that kind of list, are we playing utility lands, or is the red splash taking up the slots that would have been taken up by the utility lands?
Yeah, that sounds like a good rule. I cannot see any of those colorless lands if you really want to cast your third color in a general sense. Like, maybe if you just play it for Nicol Bolas and you have no other cards and your fixing with card draw is generally good, but maybe you can fit in one if you already play 27 lands, which you probably do in those control decks. But
now I can see it playing like a Field of Ruin.
Well, you always play Field of Ruin, I'd say. I mean, there's just
alright, even in 3-color decks. That's
no, of course, because it still gets you one of those colors.
Okay, yeah, especially in the slower decks, I like it. Yep.
But there must be like a very, very solid reason, because once you fill up with 3 colors, also your spells get much better, so you don't really need an Art of Gorazka that much as like a monocolored list, because you already have access to powerful spells. Maybe Scavenger Grounds would be a nice reasoning, because it has an effect that usually you don't want as a whole card in your deck, but it still has the effect of using it. But I would say that should have done much more nods than actually it does.
Well, I think we've put together some pretty solid takeaways for our listeners. We can revisit them again very quickly. Make sure you include 20 coloured sources in a monocolour deck, and then feel free to fill out utility lands. Be sparing with utility lands in 2-colour lists, because you will find that your mana base is heavily impacted, especially when you're playing with double-coloured spells. And when you're playing 3 colours, really, you should not be looking to play any utility lands outside of something like Field of Ruin, or any colourless utility lands. I should say here, because generally we're always, and here are some other takeaways. Always play the Desert of the X in your colour. Look to play the Desert Spell lands if the effect is a good fit for your deck. And the memorials generally also worthy of inclusion, except for the memorial for war, unless again it's going to be a reasonable, in a slower red deck, it might be a better fit. Finally, of course, the lesson that we sort of touched upon earlier is you should always really play the 2-color lands, every single one that you can get your hands on, and well, I guess we will determine what exactly constitutes a 2-color land after this week's Twitter poll. So make sure you jump on our Twitter, at Stacking Sixties, and vote no, like a sensible person, and then we can... just remember, when you're voting, if you're undecided, when you're voting, just remember that in last week's monthly booster giveaway bonanza, we gave away 30 boosters, and 0 of those boosters belong to Toffel. So let's really, really punish him this month. Yeah?
Are we one of those podcasts that let like hatred and fear dictate the outcome of a result? Or are we reasonable? Okay.
Well,
maybe
no,
you're not,
not
reasonable.
usually we're not, except when you're in the crosshairs, my friend.
Okay, I understand. Also, if you listened until now, we have to still do a disclaimer. If you use one of our mana base, all your mana bases will be owned by us, like will be our property, so that we can say all your base are belong to us.
You've got mail.
Welcome to Jamin's Mailbag, where I, Jamin, will read out your mail. Today, we've got mail from The Bardle. He writes, "Hey guys, thanks for the fun show every week. A couple technical questions for you. I have a copy of Damping Sphere in my Yargle Control Brawl deck, a Star Wars themed deck based on the Rancor from episode 6. For casual play, it's a perfect piece of silliness and hindrance. At the higher level, is that actually worth playing, or what should I be looking to replace it with when I play against such decks? And is Yargle a better commander with matched swamps or mismatched swamps?
Why is this happening?
Would he be more aggressive the more mismatched
Why?
they became?
Why do our loyal listeners torment me so?
I mean, it depends on the viewing point, right? At one point it seems like Torment, and the other point it seems like a two-color dual land. So,
Well, okay, all right, whatever.
Thanks again for sharing your knowledge and the show. The Bardle.
Thanks so much, The Bardle, and I have to say as well, thank you, a special thank you going to The Bardle, as he's one of our newest patrons. He's joined up and pledged some money for each episode that we release, and we are very, very thankful indeed. And of course, this is one of the reasons we're reading out his mail. We do tend to prioritise the mail sent in by our loyal and much beloved patrons. So thanks so much, The Bardle. Again, if your parents named you that, I don't know what is going through their heads, but hey, you know, you do you, The Bardle. This email for me brings up an interesting point, and I think that's something that, you know, even if we're not talking about the specifics of this individual situation, is something that people who are looking to play competitive Brawl are really going to have to keep in mind. Damping Sphere is not a good Brawl card. It's not. Like, there's no nice way to say it. It's cool and it's fun, and, you know, as you said in your email, it's a perfect piece of silliness and hindrance. It's going to be annoying for your opponent to play extra mana for their spells, but this is one of the first cards that should be on the chopping block when you're looking to play competitively.
I would say the way you phrased it was actually very nice. Like, that was a good way to say it.
Yeah, I was trying to be as diplomatic as possible.
One thing I have to say though, it seems like a perfect fit for a Star Wars themed deck, because you know the artwork looks very Star Warsy.
Yeah, well, it looks just like the Death Star.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I hadn't even thought of that before. If you want to play competitively, that's probably not a card you want to play.
Maybe you should include the actual Death Star. That could be a good one.
That would be very good.
A very
That'd
strong
be very
card.
good. I'm actually very curious to see what this Star Wars theme deck looks like, because I'm trying to think of other Star Warsy type cards that are in Brawl at the moment. So maybe The Bardle, you can send in your list, because we really would love to see it. Let's talk about this point that's raised in a broader sense, though. It's very difficult, I know, once you get sort of married to certain cards and you really enjoy playing with them and you try to find reason to put them into every single deck that you can play. Many casual players that want to make the jump to more competitive formats will have difficulty letting go of pet cards. Have you guys got any insight as to ways to make that easier? Should they look for similar cards that have a much more powerful effect, or, you know, how do you rip this band-aid off?
Well,
Talk to other players. Easy peasy. Like, this is perfect. You know, they asked us, is this good? Should you play it? You probably shouldn't. If you want to eliminate your bias, just talk to someone who hasn't got the same bias.
yeah. As a history point of view, I have a lot of pet cards. And my reasonable hint would be to get pet cards that are good, because this is like a lifelong condition we're having.
Yeah, it's a real commitment.
Yeah, and it's not easy to overcome, and it's like quitting smoking. For example, you don't just quit; you just
Quitting pet cards.
yeah, you have to start somewhere, and maybe you find like a more reasonable pet card, and then maybe
Yeah, right. So
even-
my pet card is Snapcaster Mage, and now I don't have to ever quit it because I can just put it in all of my modern decks.
Well, yeah, there's also people that eat like healthy food all the time. Well, not you, but in general there are. And they say like, whoa, I don't know what you have with celery. It's a very nice vegetable. It tastes very good. And
Ugh.
yeah, exactly. And then he's like, oh, good for you. Well, good for you. I still like my pizzas and my Hiritsugu second rights and Death Stars and whatever's.
Did you just compare pizza to Hidegutsu's second right?
I think it's a very apt comparison.
It's the best comparison I've heard today.
Yeah, it's like it's not a very good thing to continue to put into what you're doing, but it feels just absolutely excellent.
Like
Yeah, I guess putting pizza into your brawl deck really isn't a good plan.
or
It's very very difficult to shuffle.
if I had a stressful day and I go back to buying like a pizza and relax, and the pizza is actually spicy, I think it will kill me.
You just want to let it go, mate. It was just a teaspoon of Tabasco. All weekend Toffel was talking about the evil things he's going to make me do with Jamin.
I will
At the
find
moment, I think
something.
the front runner is going golfing, which sounds pretty horrific. Because any kind of sports ball related activity, I'm really not going to do
Like
too
this
well
is
at.
this is one of those slapback things, Like it's a little bit fun to have it in the open to just imagine all the horrible possibilities it could be.
Yeah, the anticipation is actually much worse than the punishment.
Yeah, so I will like not let it rest until there's something very, very annoying.
Can we think of just very quickly? Can we think of an actual replacement for this Damping Sphere in a Yargle deck? Is there a black card or an artifact that is sort of disruptive and annoying to play against?
Maybe he can play a Metal Spinner's Puzzle Knot that looks a bit like a Death Star.
Okay, so just from purely a sort of aesthetic point of view, for sure.
Like it doesn't really look like it, but maybe a Metalwork Colossus for like those 8080s.
Wow.
Or the Blackblade Reforged looks like a little bit like a lightsaber,
Yeah, I like it.
Oh.
and it's like actually good, right?
Well, yeah, I guess it's very good with Yargle because
Yargle already has 9 power though.
yeah,
Yeah,
it
but
doesn't
then
have
imagine
toughness.
that just get in for 20 instead of 9.
Jeez, imagine Yargle yielding a lightsaber.
Yielding one, giving it up to his opponent.
What? No, I mean
Wielding, yeah.
Wielding, yes.
Yeah, Ajani the Unyielding. You cannot F6 it.
Yeah.
Just play Heart of Kieran, man. It looks a little bit like a spaceship, and costs the same amount, and is actually legitimately a very good card. So I mean that's an option.
Heart of Kieran could be one of those Naboo fighters, right?
A pod racer.
No, Naboo is.
Oh no, you're talking about. Oh yeah. It does look like a lot like a Naboo starfighter. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
the orange ones that
that's
Anakin uses
great.
in Episode 1.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, we've done it. The perfect replacement.
All right.
There you go, the battle. Thanks so much for getting in touch, and thanks so much for asking those hard-hitting questions. It is difficult. I mean, I'm not making fun of you. It is difficult to cut pet cards. It's difficult to cut cards that you like, and leveling up your game to play competitively is not always the easiest thing. So thanks for reaching out. It's always great to hear from you. If you'd like to join the hallowed ranks of our correspondence, it's very easy to do so. Stacking60s@gmail.com is our email address, or you can jump on our website, stacking60s.net, and you'll find the contact form there. That's just about that. We are all out of time. It is time now to wrap up the show. Thanks so much for listening to another episode of Stacking Sixties, the Brawl podcast. It's been great to hang out with you this week, as of course it is every week. Going to close out the show with the usual housekeeping announcements. We have, of course, a website, stacking60s.net, is where you can find everything you need to know about the show, everything from old episodes to deck lists to all of our social pipes. You can find us on Twitter at Stacking60s. All of us have individual Twitter accounts as well if you want to follow us. We've got some videos up on YouTube and a Discord server. Yamin, you're in charge of the Discord and, of course, our YouTube channel. So any updates you need to bring the audience across here?
Before Brawl went back online, we actually had only very little discussion on Brawl, but right now it's on fire. Everyone is exchanging ideas, exchanging lists. So if you want to be up to date or have any questions, just hop on the Discord, ask in the Brawl channel, and you'll have plenty of responses to learn from.
Probably the main Brawl hub for live discussion, I would say, and it's definitely worth jumping in there if you've got a list you need tuned, or you want inspiration, or you've got some ideas or some questions you want to ask. It's a great way to talk to other like-minded Brawl enthusiasts. We do give away boosters at the end of each show, and this show is no different, my friends. Toffel's Tweet is our weekly competition. If you jump on Twitter and tweet anything Brawl related with the hashtag Toffel's Tweet, your tweet might be read out on the show, and if it is, 5 boosters coming your way just like that, no questions asked. I would like to apologise at this point to those of you who have won this competition in the past. There has been a significant delay in getting those boosters to you, and it's 100% my fault. It's just been a ridiculous couple of weeks with travelling with the Pro Tour and GPs and stuff. Rest assured, they are on their way, and I do very much apologise for the delay. So for those of you who have won in the past, don't worry, check the mailbox, and they'll be there within, a couple of months, I would say, hopefully. Let's be honest.
By 2019.
Hopefully before we begin the next year of successful podcasting, you may have got your 5 boosters. No, look, I've got quite a couple of weeks coming up, so I'll hopefully be on top of it. But I did want to take the time and apologise and say that it is 100% my fault. It's got nothing to do with anyone else. I've just fallen behind with it, but I'm doing my best. Anyway, Toffel, let's get underway and close out the show with, of course, Toffel's Tweet.
Toffel's Tweet. Incoming. All right. This week's Toffel's Tweet comes from Mush27. Is it?
Yeah, I mean, he hit all the other. He went Mush, no taken. Mush 1, no taken. Mush 2, damn it. Mush 3, ah.
Well, I guess that's some seminar. Or one of them really liked the name Mush so much he already registered all the other things.
All the other ones, just in case. Yeah, backup real estate. Yeah, for sure.
All right, so he says, after Toffel's great run at GP Copenhagen, thank you, has he considered adapting his RB high draft pick stack for Brawl? First of all...
red, black draft all-stars.
Yeah, first of all, that is very rude, but very accurate.
Yeah.
No. I have not, but it gave me a little idea, because Jamin is known for playing low picks draft decks, right? Like,
wow, I don't know how low you would pick, like, Duskborn Sky Marcher.
Or Grasping Scoundrel.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Old Graspy. No, I think this is a fair assessment of your playstyle in Brawl. Toffel loves to play draft high picks. You love to play draft low picks, and I guess that leaves me somewhere in the middle.
You'll get the 4th pick.
So maybe for one of the feature matches we can make like a last draft pick Brawl deck.
Yes.
That's very good. Yes. All right.
But you're only allowed to play cards that are like 10th pick or later.
Yeah, like last pick. And that's going to be really good because a bunch of like weird constructed rares end up going last pick as well. So you could bruise something up that's, oh man, super spicy. That's a fantastic idea, Toffel.
I love it.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for your message. And that's 5 boosters coming your way probably around 2021.